Hello, everyone. In this section, we are going to talk about Cisco Unified Communication Manager installation. We're going to talk about the various aspects of the installation from planning to the real, uh, installation of Cisco Unified Communication Manager, aka Call Manager. So we'll talk about the hardware requirement, the virtual machine requirements, the template that is required to install the Cisco Unified Communication Manager. Other prerequisites that are essential for Cisco Unified Communication Manager, for example, DNS, the IP address, subnet mask, default gateway that we're going to assign to the call manager, NTP, Network Time Protocol, NTP server, IP address that is also required uh, to set up the CUCM installation. Different type of users that are required. So let's start one by one. Let's start with virtual machines and its requirement, because Cisco Unified Communication Manager 10 supports virtual machines, and uh, with with these machines, you have got the leverage to use the virtualized environment instead of installing it directly on the bare metal. So let's talk about the virtual machines requirement real quick. All right, so I have got this documentation open. This is a document which talks about different version of call manager and their hardware requirement from 10 to 11 and to 11.5, 12, 12.5, and so on. So in this guide, in this session, we are going to talk about the installation of Cisco Unified Communication Manager version 10. Uh, the installation is pretty much the same for 10, 10.5, 11, 12, and so on. It's just the feature set that are more as you proceed further if the installation of 11 and 12 with the latest and greatest versions. Uh, but I would have uh, installed 11.5 or 12, um, but I do not have the OVA template with me for that, so we'll go with version 10.x. Though we can talk about how you can access 12.5 call manager server for free in our later section without deploying them yourself and saving a lot of time. All right, so having said that, let's focus on version 10.x hardware requirement. So in our lab, since it's a lab, you know, setup, we are going to give it the least hardware required, which is we're going to assign it 2 vCPU, 4 GB of RAM, and 180 gigs of hard disk, and one virtual NIC. All right, so this is going to support only around 1,000 users. So since it's going to be our lab environment, we do not need more than 10, 12 users, right? So we're going to be good with just as low as 2 CPU and 4 GB RAM and 180 gigs of hard disk. I'll paste the link of this guide which talks about the VM configuration requirements and the supported hardware, which is mentioned here. You can also take a look at them. What all is supported, what all is not, and so on. You can also take a look at the notes for 1,000 users VM configuration. All right, so let's go ahead and configure the virtual machine. So here, let me launch my uh, VMware Workstation. This is a software that I'm using to deploy all my, unified communication setup. So if you could see on the left, I have got 11.x Contact Center Express server, Contact Center Express 12.5, some other servers like CVP, ICM for UCC Enterprise, and Cisco Unified Communication Manager. There is one data center as well. It's a domain controller server, sorry. It's a Windows machine which has got the DHCP and the DNS and so on. All right, so this VMware Workstation 15 Pro, you can use it on your lab, right? And it's you can use it, you can download it from the internet and can use it. So I'm using this one here, which allows me with great flexibility. Apart from VMware Workstation 15, you can also deploy this setup on Oracle VM VirtualBox. So this is also a software that you could use on your Windows machine or on your operating systems to create virtual machines. So, but I generally use VMware Workstation because that's quite, uh, you know, no, I'm quite habitual to it, and it's pretty decent in terms of the interface that it provides. It's pretty simple and straightforward. All right, so to create a virtual machine, right, you got to have the same setup. If you could notice that I set up another, uh, call manager, Cisco Unified Communication Manager, 10.x, right, 10. If you could notice, I'm just highlighting the file here, which says it's 10.0.1 version of call manager. So it has got the same setup, right? So what I'm gonna do is basically I'm gonna use the similar setup to create my virtual machine here. So let me show you quickly the properties of this virtual machine. This virtual machine, by the way, which is running my Cisco Unified Communication Manager, is functional and is working just fine. So I'm just trying to show you that the hardware configuration, the virtual machine configuration that is there mentioned in this document, which says 2 vCPU, right, which is virtual CPU, 4 GB of virtual RAM, and 180 gigs. So it's all the CPU, RAM, and disk, but since we are deploying it on a virtual environment, it says vCPU, VRAM, and VDisk, right? So let's go back here. 4096 is the value for memory. Processors are number of processor 1 and number of cores per processor 2. So total processor cores is 2. These virtualization options are unchecked here, and hard disk value is 80 gigs. All right, so let me copy this location so that I can map it to my virtual machine. So I'm going to say new virtual machine and can manually put these entries like memory, processor, hard disk, and the location from where the installation file needs to be, mapped, right? The network adapter configuration and so on. So, all right, so let's go ahead and use the typical one. And the first option which it talks about is what is going to be the installer disk, the image file, right? So I'm gonna say, since I've copied my location for, I'm sorry, just a second, let me just open the ISO file from here. All right, so I'll have to manually go there and open the ISO files. All right, and yeah, there you go. So this is my disk image file here. Okay, so I'm gonna go here under G drive, ISO files, and here you go. So it says could not detect the operating system, but that's fine. We can choose the operating system by ourselves. So it is going to be Linux, right? And Red Hat Linux 6. I think 64-bit, but let me just verify it over here. Just gonna click on it and see what operating system we have. It says Red Hat Enterprise Linux 64-bit. All right. So I'm gonna start the process one more time and say typical installer disk would be the disk where I have kept my ISO, which is this guy here. And then I would choose it to be Linux, Red Hat Linux 664-bit. Perfect. Now, let me name it to be more relevant because this is not the actual call manager name, but the virtual machine's name, what you see on the left-hand side. But these are not the host names, but just the virtual machine name. So I'm going to say CUCM 10 cluster 2. CL2 stands for cluster 2. And the location would be under G drive. I'm going to say I'm going to install it here. Installations. I'm going to say under UC disk. Let me create another folder, CUCM disk cluster 2. All right, so this is my virtual machine name, CUCM10 CL2, and this is the location where it's going to create the hard disk. Now, what's going to be the hard disk size? So we know that it is supposed to be 80 gigs, right? So we're going to put it this way. And for the sake of easier to move the virtual machines, we're splitting the virtual disk into multiple files and not just a single file. All right, so next, let's verify it. 80 gigs, and it says 2048 RAM it has detected, it has allocated. So I'm going to make it 4096. That is going to be 4 gigs, right? And I'm going to give it 2 core processors, 2 core per processor. So it has got now 2 processors. I'm going to leave these all, right? And all right, so we have got this option checked, connected power on. Make sure that you have it checked because sometimes what happens is that this is not checked, and when you start the virtual machine, it does not really boot the call manager. So that's really funny. So you make sure that it is connected and it is connect at power on. And this is the voice ISO file that we already have. I'm going to use bridge connection so that my call manager can talk to over the internet as well. It's going to be bridged with my local area network. Uh, I do not need NATing, right? I just need my call manager since it's a lab network, right? Rest of them like USB, sound, printer, display, right? I'm gonna leave it as is. So we're good with 4 GB RAM, 2 GBs of processor. I'm sorry, 2 core processors. The ISO file is mapped and connected power on, right? The ISO file is mapped here as well. The network bridge is selected to be bridged. I'm gonna say close. Now it summarizes 2 vCPU, bridge network adapter, 4 gigs of RAM and 80 gigs of hard disk. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 64-bit workstation 15.x. That's the virtualization provider, virtualization environment provider. All right, so I'm gonna say finish, and it's gonna create my CUCM10 cluster 2. I'm gonna just drag it and take it here. All right, so now I'm gonna in the next session I'm gonna talk about the installation. So when we click on power on this virtual machine, it's gonna start the installation process. Okay, so hope to see you in the next session.